Okay, for the benefit of people who showed up on time, we're going to go ahead and begin. My name is Mike Sesma. I'm a council member in the city of Gaithersburg, Maryland, and I'm the vice chair of the Energy, Environment, and Natural Resources Committee. This workshop today is entitled Sustainable Inclusive Communities, Engaging Communities for Equitable Development. And our speakers here today are Carlton Eley, an urban planner and with the American Planning Association, Nora Liu, who works in neighborhood planning and community land use in the city of Seattle, Washington, and Emily Tallon, the director of the Phoenix Urban Research Lab at Arizona State University and a professor in the School of Geographical Sciences and Urban Planning in the School of Sustainability. So it's an interesting topic that we're exploring today. I'm glad to see. I think hopefully the audience will build as we go on. I think sustainability is a term that we've all come to adopt, and it's kind of replacing other names that we've been using in the area of greening our cities. At this point, the issues of conservation, energy efficiency, reducing pollution and waste, recycling and reuse, pedestrian-friendly, carbon footprint reduction, greening the community, many more of these terms have been incorporated into this bigger global concept that we call sustainability, as in creating a sustainable community that maintains the quality of life, facilitates economic growth, creates livable communities, reduces costs to residents and businesses, etc. So the question is then, if we're going to do this, how do we ensure that sustainable communities are inclusive of and benefit everyone who lives in those communities? When I was first elected to the city council in my city in Gaithersburg, Maryland, in 2005, we were on the crest of the wave of smart growth, new urbanism, transit-oriented development. And what I learned very quickly was that the smart growth that many people were talking about, many developers were talking about, didn't seem to be smart for everyone. It was smart for a certain segment of the population, usually the part of the population that already was enjoying considerable economic benefits. So the benefits accrued to a demographic and created burdens for the lower socioeconomic demographic, or the population that actually stood the most to gain in terms of improvement of their living, working, educational, and recreational lives, were not benefiting from our ideas of what smart growth were. One of the topics that I wanted to deal with when I was first elected was the issue of affordable housing. To many people in the community, affordable housing was a pejorative term. And it has a lot of meaning still. And it was resisted by some communities, but clearly sought after by other communities. It wasn't clear with our transit-oriented communities where that transit was going to come from. It's still not clear given our budget situation. So in creating strategies for sustainability, we have to support and we have to attend to the needs of the entire community. We have to acknowledge the benefits to large and small businesses, to entrepreneurs, to established businesses, to the disabled, to the poor and vulnerable, to families, to preserving historical heritage or architectural heritage or land heritage. We have to look to revitalize communities, retaining and enhancing open space, reducing auto use, providing transit and pedestrian byways. We have to balance the needs for new versus redevelopment, balance the upfront costs and investments with future return on investment. What happens when we decide that we need to redevelop or revitalize an area? What happens with new development? Are we creating space for people who've lived there for years, whose relative costs of living are, their income related to their cost of living is relatively fixed and can't afford many of the new things that we're bringing them in terms of amenities? So what are the strategies for ensuring inclusiveness and diversity of people and businesses and jobs and amenities and the necessities of life? So that's what we're going to ask our panel to address, both as a strategic issue and in terms of real world issues. So now, before we begin, I'm going to introduce each of them, and then we'll begin. Each of them will talk for 5 to 10 minutes about these issues and focusing on their perspective on these and their own experience in working in these areas. And then hopefully in about 30 minutes we'll be able to talk about this just like, welcome to the NLC living room here. We'll be able to talk about this pretty casually, take questions from the audience. So Carlton Eley is an urban planner and planning and the Black community at the Planning and the Black Community Division of the American Planning Association. Carlton is an environmentalist, urban planner, and lecturer. He's working to normalize environmental justice during the planning process, and he's become an accomplished expert on the topic of equitable development in the public sector. Carlton has coordinated national competitions that recognize communities for encouraging equitable development, and he has published multiple articles on the subject. In 2003, he participated in the Ian Axford Fellowship in Public Policy in New Zealand, and he's the first American to conduct research on the topic of smart growth in New Zealand. Following that fellowship, he wrote a chapter on Wellington, New Zealand for the book Local Sustainable Urban Development in a Globalized World. Carlton served on community advisory service teams for Pamlico County, North Carolina, Gary, Indiana, and the Rainier Valley in the Netherlands. His work has been commended by the Ford Foundation, the National Charette Institute, the Harvard University Graduate School of Design, and his technical assistance work and public engagement efforts have earned citations from the American Planning Association and the National Organization of Minority Architects. Carlton has a Bachelor of Arts in Sociology and Social Work curriculum from Elizabeth City State University in North Carolina.
Yep.
And as well as a Master's of Science in Urban and Regional Planning from the University of Iowa. Nora Liu is a neighborhood planning and community land use official from the city of Seattle, Washington. Nora is the neighborhood planning manager with Seattle's Department of Planning and Development. 3 communities in southeast Seattle have just completed their neighborhood plan updates and are in the implementation phase. Currently, the city is working with community members in Rainier Beach and Broadview, Bitter Lake, Howler Lake to update their plans. Before that, Nora was a senior policy advisor on Mayor Nichols' community development team in Seattle, where her work focused on southeast Seattle, an area of significant cultural, economic, and ethnic diversity. 80% composed 80% of people of color and 40% who are foreign-born. She brings extensive community development experience to the city, having spent 12 years at Homesite, a nonprofit community development organization in southeast Seattle. Nora's work there included development of over 250 homes affordable to first-time buyers and the newly reopened Wing Luke Asian Museum, a 58,000 square foot Smithsonian-affiliated museum, and in addition to her work as a community advocate for Southeast Seattle. Emily Tallon is the director of the Phoenix Urban Research Lab at ASU and professor in the School of Geographical Sciences and Urban Planning, School of Sustainability. Is that the first School of Sustainability?
They like to say so.
Okay, well, all right. We're in the home of the first School of Sustainability. Emily is okay. You're also the director of the Phoenix Urban Research Lab, an extension of ASU's design school located in downtown Phoenix. She holds a PhD in urban geography from the University of California, Santa Barbara, and a master's degree in city and regional planning from Ohio State University. We got Buckeyes in the hall here? So, okay, sorry. Prior to being at Arizona State, she was faculty in the Department of Urban and Regional Planning at the University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana for 8 years. She's a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners. She's written extensively on the topics of urbanism, urban design, and social equity, and has published 50 peer-reviewed journal articles on these topics and 3 sole-authored books, and a forthcoming book, City Rules, that will explore the coded dimension of the urban form. So that's our panel. Looking forward to a lively discussion, but first we're going to begin with Carlton. Okay. Do you want me to manage those or your slides?
Could you do that?
Sure, I can do that.
And I'll just nod.
Sure.
Okay. Well, again, Michael, thank you for that introduction, and I just want to say thank you to all of you for taking the time to attend. Before I begin, I just want to extend greetings on the behalf of the Planning and the Black Community Division of the American Planning Association. We're actually one of 25 special interest groups within the APA, and we were established roughly 31 years ago. For the time that I have available, I really just want to take a moment to offer a little bit of background on equitable development and really just share how cities around the country are applying this approach in order to advance goals for sustainability. One of the first things that I should acknowledge is the fact that today's discussion is important as well as timely because of the fact that it's actually coming on the heels of PolicyLink's Equity Summit, which is currently occurring within the city of Detroit as we speak. And for those of you who are not aware, PolicyLink is one of the nation's leading proponents for equitable development. I realize it's important to start with a common definition so that everyone is on the same page. So when I say equitable development, what I'm referring to is an approach in order to meet the needs of underserved communities through policies and practices that reduce disparities while fostering places that are healthy and vibrant. Normally, when I'm asked to offer remarks on this topic, I begin by simply referencing some of the work of the International City-County Management Association. And one of the reasons why I do that is because ICMA tends to acknowledge that planning at its best takes into account the social implications of land use and economic development decisions. What that means is that planning is not professionally or institutionally separate from the social realm. In a practical sense, it means that we're a nation of 309 million people. And we have citizens here from all walks of life. And so if we don't think critically about how to meet the needs of vulnerable populations properly, then we may fall short in ensuring that everyone has a safe and healthy environment in which to live, work, and play. Now, I don't want to belabor the point, but the social implications of land use and economic development have actually been a recurring theme in planning practice over the span of the past 40 years. Now, traditionally, some of the barriers to encouraging social equity during the planning process have been framing how to implement it, visualizing the product from that process, as well as correcting the misperception that addressing these issues may slow down development. But I just want to acknowledge that thanks to the tireless efforts of researchers and advocates, as well as the innovative thinking associated with people who work in architecture and planning, as well as some of the very compelling results of determined community builders, those barriers are actually coming down. And what we're actually learning is simply the fact that we can do well while doing good. One of the other things I want to acknowledge is the fact that we don't have to have an abstract discussion about issues like equitable development because there are many practical examples of this approach being applied in communities around the country, such as examples like the 18th and Vine Jazz District in Kansas City, Missouri. One of the things you should know about this project is that it was created around 1989 when Emanuel Cleaver, who's now a U.S. Congressman, he was a city council member at the time. And the Jazz District was created with the vision of balancing economic development and cultural development within that city. The neighborhood where the 18th and Vine Jazz District is now was an area that experienced a period of decline over the span of about 40 years, like so many other urban areas within our country. But Emanuel Cleaver had the foresight to realize that this neighborhood had a place making dividend. And today, Kansas City has distinguished itself as a city that has attempted to create a sense of parity by focusing on issues of heritage preservation as well as embracing the cultural assets within that city. The other thing that's worth noting about this particular project is the fact that it has resulted in this district becoming a very successful neighborhood by focusing on ways in order to give residents and visitors an authentic experience. Another example I could reference is really the Regenesis Project in Spartanburg, South Carolina. One of the things I really like about this project is the fact that it emphasizes that there is a real nexus between issues pertaining to environmental justice, land use, and sustainability. There are a lot of important things to note about the Regenesis Project in the sense that it's a project that really demonstrates the effectiveness of collaborative environmental problem solving and effectively demonstrates how ordinary citizens can achieve extraordinary outcomes, such as cleaning up 2 Superfund sites and managing vacant properties, as well as conducting community design charrettes that helped the neighborhoods that were the focus of this project to be placed on a new trajectory in order to improve quality of life for the residents who were affected by some of the pollution that was a legacy problem within that neighborhood. Some of the other things that's worth noting about this particular project is simply the fact that Harold Mitchell, who was one of the residents in the neighborhood that was the focus of this area, was very successful in taking a $25,000 grant from EPA's Office of Environmental Justice and leveraging it into $250 million worth of investment for his community. A third project that I could mention is really the Fruitvale Transit District in Oakland, California. One of the important things about this project is the fact that it demonstrates that in terms of advancing goals of sustainability, one of the keys to the success of advancing such issues is really to be pliable. In this instance, the Bay Area Rapid Transit Authority had the option of either initiating a project that lacked community support or moving forward with an effort whereby they will work with the residents within that district in order to frame a plan for the local area. Fortunately, the Transit Authority opted to work with residents to focus more so on public involvement, as well as to focus on creating a vision large enough to meet the needs of physical, social, and human capital. And the outcome of that process is a very compelling transit-oriented development that works to bring residents within the community together rather than to buffer or separate neighborhood assets. And one of the important things to note about this particular project is the fact that it demonstrates that the success of place-based initiatives will really depend on how effectively we can engage untapped audiences, as well as leverage the support of untapped talent that can help us in order to further goals of sustainability within cities and regions within our country. Now, as a planner, I like to talk about great work because the results speak for themselves. And one of the important things that I do need to acknowledge about all of these projects is simply the fact that they've demonstrated that compelling results for equitable development are not the result of serendipity. They're the outcome of clearly set expectations, collaborative problem solving, and persistent leadership. The other thing that I just want to note is the fact that as city leaders and as stewards of the built environment, we have some very important choices to make. The Center for American Progress conducted some research around 2006 that looked at the importance of moving from poverty to prosperity. And one of the interesting things about that report is the fact that they were able to articulate quite well that what sustainability really means is the fact that we're wrapped in a garment of mutual destiny. In that report, they pointed out that within our country, we have 37 million Americans who are actually living below the official poverty line. And so what that means is that at the micro scale, persistent poverty can affect future opportunities for children, as well as opportunities for adults in terms of advancing their careers, as well as trying to provide just the basic needs for meeting the needs of their household and their families as well. But at the macro scale, persistent poverty can result in challenges that really affect the ability of our nation to remain competitive in a world of increasing global competition. And so again, as community leaders, as stewards of the built environment, whether we're planners or architects, we have to be really mindful in terms of how we can advance goals and objectives in terms of improving our communities, while also mindful of ways in order to help balance the playing field rather than amplifying the wealth gap. Now, I want to be mindful of my time and frame my remarks within 7 minutes because we have a lot of great people who are on this panel. But as I wrap up, there's a very important issue that I do want to acknowledge. In my role as an urban planner, I tend to share with audiences when I speak with them simply the fact that I'm in the business of giving sustainability a push. And when I say that, I'm not trying to be cheeky. Instead, I'm attempting to convey that it's been my experience time and again that we can really focus on ways in order to do well while doing good. The other thing I just want to acknowledge is simply the fact that in terms of advancing goals of innovation, one of the important things to note is simply the fact that the premise of innovation requires acknowledging the fact that healthy things grow, including paradigms. And so it's been my experience that as we work in order to encourage communities that are more livable, more sustainable, that improve our quality of life, that we also have to be mindful of not just advancing a triple bottom line, but moving beyond that in order to advance goals of social equity as well. And so I just want to leave you with that, particularly as we continue this conversation, as we work to focus on strategies that not only make our communities sustainable, but focus on ways in which we can make them whole. And so I want to thank you for indulging me. I appreciate your patience. And for those of you who are interested, I do have a takeaway that I'm happy to share with any of you once we reach the end of our discussion today. So thank you very much.
There it is. And I think I'm actually going to stand up and come over there and do that. Is that okay with you? Let's see if I can. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm honored to be here to have this discussion with you all. And I'm also very grateful for the fact that we have the opportunity to talk about how environmental sustainability and social equity do start intersecting. For me, it's a very important piece of work. And it's frankly what drives me. It's what makes me get up in the morning. We're at a point in time where I think our communities, our people, really start understanding the value of sustainability, environmental sustainability, right? And the notion of living in pedestrian-oriented communities and being able to walk out and get to a lot of the things that you need in daily life or get transit to it has become a popular thing again. And so that is a good thing for the long term of our world. What we have, the piece that we're trying to weave in now in terms of this conversation is the fact that as we make those improvements in our place-based development, as we make those improvements to the physical environment, that has an impact on the real estate value of that neighborhood that we do those improvements in. And that then has an impact on the people who live there, especially the people who have fewer options and fewer choices. And so, for that reason, the integration of really the people conversation and the physical environment conversation, I think, is really, really important. Because, as people brought up earlier, the question really is who benefits from the improvements and the investments that government makes? Who benefits and who bears the burden? And what we're trying to do here is to make sure that the investments the benefit of those investments accrue to all people. So, to that end, what we're doing in the city of Seattle is we have 38 neighborhood plans. A little bit of context and history. When we passed the Washington State Growth Management Act, we were sprawling into our ag lands and sprawling into our wilderness areas, which, this means up to the mountainsides. And so what we did was we passed the State Growth Management Act, and part of that was requiring that jurisdictions really focus their growth within urban boundaries. And so we, the city, took a look at our neighborhoods and said, okay, here's some areas that can take some growth. And in the 90s, we said to those communities, we said, okay, so we'll trade you. We'll make a deal with you. If you're willing to accept growth, we'll give you some money to do a neighborhood plan, and you have some money, you have a consultant, do a neighborhood plan, so that you can help shape that growth and also help dialogue back to us about what you feel like needs to accompany that growth in order to create a great neighborhood. Those were completed in 1999. Since then, we have had a couple of things. One is we've had a race and social justice initiative that has been supported by both the mayor and by our elected mayor and council, and we're very grateful for that. We also have had an executive order to do more inclusive outreach and engagement, which requires that if we're talking about something important, and there's a whole grade of how important is important, in communities, then in communities where there's more than X percentage of a population, of a community in that population, we need to translate our materials, we need to communicate it in all those languages as well. So we've had that happen. We also have had our light rail system become operational, the first leg of our light rail system. And that became operational in 2009. And it went from downtown Seattle south to the airport. And it went through Southeast Seattle. Southeast Seattle is an area that's roughly 55,000 people. It has a very broad economic and cultural diversity. It's very blessed that way. It has the Gold Coast, the people who live along the lakes, or the Sound, and then up the hills to the ridge. And then it has the valley, where things are more affordable. And let's see if I can figure out how to do this. And so our light rail system was going down a grade. And where I'm talking about is Beacon Hill, Mount Baker, Columbia City, Othello, Rainier Beach. Those are the 4 stops within the city of Seattle that are now operational that go down to the airport. The white dots down below are outside the city of Seattle, and the dots above Westlake. From Beacon Hill to Westlake, it runs either in an industrial area or also it's in a tunnel. The dotted portion to the north is currently being constructed. So the first phase came online in 2009, and we understood that that was going to be a game changer. And so in Rainier Valley, where it's 80% people of color, 40% foreign born, and I've talked about the wide income variety, it also is an area where the last non-subsidized multifamily building was built in 1974, okay? So the reason why we started updating our neighborhood plans, it was decided by our mayor and council that it was time for us to update our neighborhood plans. And then we're going to start in 3 neighborhoods in Southeast Seattle. And I use Southeast Seattle, Rainier Valley kind of synonymously. They have some, they're not exactly identical, but for the purpose of this conversation, forgive me for the going back and forth. But we were going to start there for 2 reasons. One is understanding that the light rail stations were going to be game changers. And 2, understanding us coming to a greater appreciation of the wealth of people that we have in our city and how it defines our city and our need to be supportive of them. In our previous effort to do neighborhood planning, we had a lot of engagement. Part of that effort was really to create an engaged populace, and we did. Because of the nature of the conversation and the amount of time it took, it really attracted a certain type of people, the people who had more flexibility and who also understood our bureaucratic processes and our bureaucratic language. And so it was primarily homeowners and business owners. What we realized was we had a whole number of people who were historically underrepresented. And we were charged by council to really reach out to them, to do a different kind of outreach and really to reach out to them. So in this conversation, I'm going to talk about 2 things. One is the outreach and engagement effort that we're using in order to get people involved and really to build an engaged populace. We're hoping will stay involved beyond this planning process. The other is a little bit about content, about how we are looking at planning and really trying to knit the people back into the conversation so that it doesn't remain completely a place-based conversation. So I just brought, really, this whole thing is just to show you some photos of our meetings, because our meetings were very fun. We embarked on this program called, which we call Planning Outreach Liaison, some people call Trusted Advocates. Have any of you heard of either of those kinds of strategies? No. So what we have done is we have hired people from within the communities that we want to reach out to. We've hired leadership from that community, and we've said, you understand how your community is structured, how to tap into your community. You also understand the language and culture of your community, and you understand our language and culture. And so partly there are interpreters between not only English, but also our bureaucratic language. But they also are our bridge builders, our relationship builders. And so for the first 3 neighborhoods we did, we hired 13 planning outreach liaisons. And they were in 9 different languages, including, I can do them all, Somali, Vietnamese, Amharic, Tigrinya, Oromo, Chinese and Spanish, to name just some of them. In addition to that, we also had people reaching out to our seniors and people living with disabilities, our renters, and our youth, and African Americans. So what happened was we understood from talking to folks, from our planning outreach liaisons, and I will call them POLs from now on, and I will often refer to the communities they reach out to as the POL community. What we learned from them is that for a lot of communities, meeting with the city or government is really not high on their list. It's either they're not interested in it, or frankly, it's just terrifying. You know, given the history of some of these people in their relationships with either their own governments or our government. The notion of willingly coming to a meeting with the government just is not a starter. And so what our people, our POLs did was they went out, we trained them in the materials, and for the first couple of meetings, they brought that material and held them in their communities and brought their people to their meetings, right? And we had very few staff involved in that. They did the work, they kept on checking back with us, they did they organized how they're going to meet with people, they did the invitations, they also translated or interpreted all of our materials for us. We understand, though, that ultimately our effort is about building community across all these different cultures, and really that has to happen. And so the first couple of meetings are separate, and then as we get closer to the end of the process, it's a 4 kind of phase process. We started having larger meetings that were come one, come all. These were some of our early meetings. They're just great slides. And you know, we talked about the built environment. Here, people are looking at zoning on maps. We talked about building heights with people. We held big old meetings, just like everybody always does. We held workshops. We did the dot exercises. And one of the things that was really fun about our meetings, it was really inspiring for me, was the fact that as we got closer to the end, our meetings were carried out in many different languages at once. It's a little bit like the UN, where people, you probably can't really see, but in the upper left-hand corner of those photos, everybody's got headsets on. And so you've got the Chinese POL sitting in a corner with all of her community, everybody with the headset, and you've got the Tigrinya-speaking people over there. And so what we did was we were able to hear from people what was really important to them, okay, in a way that we hadn't before. We also structured our meetings so that there were only 4 of them, rather than the first round, it was like every other week for the course of about 1.5 years. We decided that for a lot of people, that kind of time was going to be a luxury, and that we really needed to back off and really try to use people's time respectfully. So the upshot of all of that is this neighborhood plan update. Now, it's not significantly different in terms of its vision. But where it starts differing is in the strategies and the details. And so you can see what came out of here. As one of the goals is access to education for a multicultural community, also a shared multicultural community center, because people want to be able to come together and start sharing their concerns and sharing their problems. Things that come out of here, like our goals, the way left-hand one is the multicultural commercial district, was the one that got the most dots. The one on the right is about having a neighborhood well served by transit. And then in this one, which is about, it's a subtasks within the multicultural commercial district, really trying to figure out how to support the business community. The cultural business community is a really tall spike. And then the second one was supporting a rezone, the Filipino Community Center. So what we saw was a real difference in how the little details played out, which is what, frankly, is our work, right? The goals, the vision remained the same, and some of the goals, there are a couple of new goals, and some of the goals got tweaked. But basically, where the real change came was in the strategies. The other thing was, so let me just leave it right there for a minute. The other thing that I wanted to just touch on briefly, because I think I'm running out of time, is that we typically talk about the built environment. You know, we talk about the zoning, we talk about the land use, we talk about the roads, we talk about parks and all. And what we have done through this process in our second iteration of this is flip that a little bit around. What we're saying now is a great neighborhood is a neighborhood with a strong and resilient community, with the ability for people and families to lead healthy lives, and a physical environment to support the communities and the people. And so what we're trying to do is figure out some ways, some mechanisms to keep the people anchored into that geography as the places grow around them. With the light rail stations having come in, these places, as soon as the economy turns around, are going to start growing again. And so our real work is to try to figure out how to keep that Vietnamese commercial district in place, and have the Vietnamese community be able to continue living there and get their goods and services and their jobs at the same time as we grow and really transform into a pet-oriented, transit-oriented community. This neighborhood, I think you saw in the early picture, is really just kind of one story, strip mall, auto-oriented place. And so what we're hoping is in that transition from auto-oriented to pet-oriented and transit-oriented, we're able to really support the people who are there and help grow them, as well as bringing in new people. So that's my view.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I actually didn't bring any slides, sorry to say. So,
Is it on? Yeah, it's hot.
Is it on now?
Green light.
Okay. Sorry I don't have any slides, but I'm just going to summarize really a book I wrote that came out a few years ago called Design for Diversity. So my interest has really been in how to maintain social diversity, and I'll tell you in a minute how I define that. And I think broadly there's kind of two approaches that planners talk about. One is programmatic things we can do to sustain and support diversity. And I think the real thrust of what's going on there right now, as I think both of our speakers have alluded to, is as you make investments in transit-oriented development, in placemaking of all kinds, Kentlands or whatever, walkable communities, how do you make sure that those places stay socially diverse? So that's often, so you've already got a really good place that's walkable, compact, got everything going for it, but it has a hard time maintaining true diversity because we don't have enough of these to go around and people get priced out. It's a classic gentrification issue. A lot of innovation. You mentioned PolicyLink. They're really great at doing all kinds of innovative things through community land trusts or whatever to try to make sure that diversity stays oriented toward these great walkable places. My focus has been, okay, that's great, we need that of course, but what about, I've been really focused on what is the built form physical urban planning requirement of diversity. And when I look around, I think this really depends on where you're located in the world. But when you look at a place like Phoenix, which I'm not from Phoenix, I've been here for going on 4 years, you couldn't really conceive of a built environment more conducive to non-diversity. Everything is segregated. There are housing pods of different housing types. Completely, disaggregated, or aggregated into their separate pods of similar type. You have very little physical urban fabric that would be supportive of diversity. Now, diversity hangs on here and there, but it's not. It's sort of in spite of a physical urban form that would be supportive of that diversity. So what do I think it's important to think about what do we mean by diversity. There's racial and ethnic diversity. There's age diversity is coming out to be a very important kind of thing. There's household and family type diversity. And there's, of course, economic diversity or income level diversity. I happen to think that economic diversity is particularly important. And they're all these different ways of thinking about diversity are important, but I've really been kind of stressing economic because that's the one that we're not really making very good progress at. There's actually been some progress in the U.S. overall at racial and ethnic neighborhood. I'm talking about neighborhood-based diversity. But when you look at what is really underlying the sort of spatial social sorting going on in the U.S., it's that economic sorting that's really at the heart of our lack of diversity. Why do we need diversity? There's a huge literature on that. Everything from creative cities, economic growth, economic vitality, vibrancy, to neighborhood resilience. Having social sustainability is very much driven by your degree of social diversity, because you want to have a neighborhood that's got some resilience to it. Cross-fertilization of ideas, neighborhood effects literature. There's a whole wealth of studies that we have now that show that a neighborhood diversity in a metropolitan area has a lot of benefits. So in terms of that physical urban form that would support diversity, I'm talking about things like housing type mix, a mix of housing ages of housing, and then codes that would allow that housing type mix. That's a really basic thing. A lot of cities do not, you have to overcome a lot of rules to be able to have that integration of housing types. And that's a very basic thing when we talk about a physical urban structure that would support social diversity. Even something like wanting to have multifamily units in a single family neighborhood, that is something that is not necessarily allowed, but something that a new approach to coding might be more supportive of, might be more conducive of. Allowing small units, granny flats, accessory dwelling units of various kinds in existing single-family neighborhoods. That's a way of using physical design, physical environment to support diversity. And in most parts of Phoenix, as in many other cities, maybe not Seattle. Seattle's pretty progressive. You may not do accessory dwelling units. So, there's a clear example of how we can use physical design to support. Allowing innovation in housing type, courtyards, something called a courtyard housing, something called a close, which was a housing type that was similar to a courtyard housing type that was very prominent in the early 20th century. Mostly you don't see that anymore, but it was a way of interjecting different housing types in the built environment. So that was just, everything I've been saying was just housing. Then there's also the need to integrate all kinds of services and businesses and facilities to support that diversity that you've got going with your mix of housing types. So fitting in small businesses in creative ways, making use of alleys to support family-owned, family-operated businesses, making sure that when there's a big format retailer that comes into a neighborhood, that it is not destroying that smaller business that was very conducive to diversity growth. These are the kinds of things that urban designers can really, I think, be very supportive of in making that big format retailer fit in better. So that's all. The book I'm talking about is divided into three kinds of strategies. Mix, a built environment that's supportive of the mix that you need. Secondly is connection. So you've got all this mix going on. You need to be strategic about how you're connecting people, because if you just lump all the chaos together like they do in Houston, you don't necessarily have a physical environment that's supportive of that mix. Making sure that collective space, identity space, institutions are properly situated, the networking, that corridors of movement, pathways for pedestrians, all these kinds of things can be very supportive of that connection. And then finally, my third sort of strategy is about security. So you're mixing all these people and all these different businesses, and you're making sure there's connection. You're going to have to pay attention to security issues. And natural forms of surveillance are, I think, really, really key. This is very Jane Jacobs kind of stuff, but making sure there are eyes on the street, making sure that spaces are activated in terms of, people taking responsibility for the public realm that's in front of them. Activation of space that might be sort of dead space that's non-secure, that's nevertheless situated in between two very diverse housing types, for example. That's the kind of space you need to pay attention to. So these are all just sort of ideas and thoughts about using urban design, physical intervention, physical planning to support diversity. I'll say one last thing, and that is the whole getting people in a neighborhood to think about the diversity that they have and how to support it through physical planning, through urban design, gets them really energized and excited about paying attention to it. They use physical design as the outlet of how to maintain and support their neighborhood. So I think that's really important. So that's all I have to say. Looking forward to questions. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you. So let me talk about the physical design a little bit, or let me ask a question related to that, because I think it's actually pretty. What we see now, I think, when we look at redevelopment and new development, is this major focus on mixed-use development. Live where you work, ground floor, retail, commercial development, some multi-story office, very little regard for anything other than very light industry, but a mix of housing that's both multifamily and owner-occupied in townhomes, townhouses, maybe some cottages, but it's this idea that mixed use is the answer to our problems of revitalizing urban, dense neighborhoods, and is that the best approach? And then taking this concept of social sustainability and putting it on top of it, along with, and then the mixed use plans associated with transit and pods associated with transit as well. So maybe we can kind of I've given you like 3 different issues here about is this focus on this mixed use concept a step in the right direction, or is it kind of leaning on this concept to answer multiple questions that it's not really able to answer, or multiple issues that it's not really adequate enough to answer all of those issues? Mm-hmm. So anybody can jump at that.
Well, I think in the U.S. we need to get really serious about doing better at city building, densifying, and mixed use and mixed housing type and public realm that supports that mixed use and mixed housing type, I see as absolutely fundamental. Now, of course, you cannot forget or lose sight of the programmatic needs and the fundamental importance of the community buy-in. And your process was just fantastic of getting people to, and I love the idea especially of incentivizing neighborhoods to be willing to take on the mixed use and the urbanism and the higher density in exchange for having some investment in their public realm. That I think is really key. So.
Anybody else on that?
So the mixed-use question is an interesting one. It's an interesting issue for us because we went through and declared urban villages and urban centers in response to the Washington State Growth Management Act. And we then said all of those areas, the commercial parts of those areas, we were going to zone mixed use and required commercial on the ground floor and residential above. And what we are now, we're now going back and rethinking that a little bit, in part because we ended up with just basically you end up with a whole floor plate of commercial. And we were finding that really we need the focus nodes of commercial, I think, do better economically. They benefit from being more condensed. Mm-hmm. But more importantly, relative to this question, the other thing that we struggle with, and I would love to have some of your thinking on this, is that a lot of our more fragile, less anchored communities have their businesses in these one-story businesses with a parking lot in front and the road, over there, that have been there since 1940 or something like that, and rent is something like $12 a square foot. And as our new mixed-use buildings come in, that rent in that same commercial space is now $30 a square foot. Mm-hmm. And that ends up being not achievable for a lot of these small businesses. And so our push to do the mixed-use thing and do the redevelopment thing in and of itself, without any kind of other thinking, ends up helping to push people out. And so one of the things we're looking at is trying to figure out how to grow those businesses. Because given the real estate in Seattle, when the economy is good, no business really can survive anymore serving just one community is my kind of off the back of my head kind of analysis. And really what people need to be able to do is figure out how to serve a broader clientele, bring in a broader clientele, and not lose your soul in terms of being who you are, right? That's a tricky proposition, but I think there's some need for that. The other thing, though, is we've talked about $12 a square foot to $30 a square foot, but really, when they're in $12 a square foot, they might have more space than they really need. And another thing we're looking at is trying to figure out if we can start doing some prototype designs for smaller business spaces that might fit in the typical structural bays of mixed-use buildings, so that the business that was in this building, the standalone building, can now maybe go into a much smaller bay than the developer typically wants, that typically builds. And then maybe building a commercial structure around that. So maybe there is a nonprofit that then has a little bit of a condo on some of those spaces, who then helps to manage the rent, the tenants in the spaces. Because instead of having one large tenant, now the developer might have 10. And so we're thinking that we might need something like an intermediary to help manage some of that. So.
Yeah, and I'll respond to it this way. When you raised the issue of mixing of uses or encouraging a pattern of mixed-use development, what resonated with me is what you were describing is the issue of what is it that really contributes towards the fabric of a community. And the fabric of our communities aren't just based on physical, spatial issues, but they're also based on the people who live there, and I guess those intangible factors that also contribute towards a sense of place. And we have to consider those issues as well. Sometimes when I lecture at universities around the country, I tell students about when I was in graduate school, as well as my early years of working on urban redevelopment issues in the public sector. And one of the things I shared was the fact that often when I participated in discussions, I often felt that something was missing from the conversation, whereas a lot of the conversations were structured around a lot of physical issues in terms of how to encourage a more compact footprint, or how to encourage a mix of uses, or how to make the neighborhoods walkable. But what I also felt was missing was conversations in terms of how do we also address issues pertaining to creating or advancing goals of heritage preservation, or how to facilitate opportunities for entrepreneurship within communities that are distressed, or how to really make communities more healthier places, beyond just a sense of well-being, but also to address issues that are relevant towards advancing goals of environmental justice as well. And so I'm sharing that just simply to acknowledge that as we focus on communities and as we focus on the physical aspects that create that place-making dividend, we also have to be mindful that there are other intangible factors that really are important towards creating that value added in terms of a community. And once we learn how to really articulate and frame the discussion and make it a broader conversation, that's really how we get at the opportunities to advance goals of parity, goals of equity as well.
Before we go to the audience here, I think we have a little bit of time. I guess one of the questions I would ask is that since we all represent municipalities with our own kind of bureaucracies and organizational structure, so what are the common challenges that cities face in making decisions to go forward with something like this in terms of implementing a plan of inclusivity in the processes that are used to determine how a city grows and develops and changes, and at the same time cities recognize as well preserving this fabric of the community that is already there, this community identity that's already there. So are there any particular common challenges that cities face in dealing with these things, those kinds of things?
Well, I guess one thing I've often thought of is how much, when you talk about something like equity and diversity and sustainability all in the same sentence, there's a lot of platitudes. And I think you just get lost in all this sort of motherhood and apple pie kind of talk, and it never really pans out on the ground, and I get really frustrated with that. So I guess that's one reason why I'm always pushing my angle about the built environment and urban design, because somehow it makes it all seem kind of tangible. But beyond that, I would say one thing I wish cities would do is really get intelligent about where is the diversity that they have right now. Like, map it out. If you were to kind of sort out your population along different characteristics, use the census, whatever. Where are those groups? Where are they living? What are the neighborhoods? And I think some communities do a way better job at that than others. They're really on top of it. They know, what neighborhoods are currently losing investment and in danger of becoming, impoverished, and what neighborhoods are gentrifying. Even having a real handle on that kind of neighborhood movement out of, from one state to another would be, I think, a tremendous asset for cities. And I'm not sure all cities are necessarily committed to gathering that kind of intelligence.
And it does take a commitment to do this kind of work. And for that, I'm grateful for the fact that our electeds have been willing to take that and create the political room for us to do the work. And the reason why it takes commitment is because for us, in our neighborhood planning process that we did that finished in 1999, it was really pretty much a pretty homogeneous demographic that controlled that conversation. And it's pretty much that same demographic who knows they can pick up the phone and call council or call the mayor when something is frustrating or something's not working for them. And when we now are going out and saying, it's important to us really to hear from the wide breadth of who lives here, because everybody lives here. Everybody uses this place. And we need to figure out how to make that work well for everybody. Mm-hmm. The people who've managed the conversation in the past are like, wait a minute. This is my conversation. I'm the one who controls it. What are you doing? And so we spent a fair bit of time working on that in our first round. And that's where the anger was and the frustration. That's how it played out. We have just kept on being very clear about why we're doing it, and the reality is that we need to hear from everybody who uses the space, and wouldn't that make it better for everybody? But there's need for our electeds to have a political will for that.
So it seems like what you're saying is that there needs to be a better linkage between a department or office of community services or neighborhood support and a division of planning and code enforcement, where they're talking at the same time as they develop a plan. Because often once a plan's done, it's done, but it was often implemented without the consideration and input other than these outreach through charrettes and stuff of the community services department, of the family services, of the neighborhood services. So
yeah, and that's a good point.
So those kinds of silos in cities may actually present a greater problem, even though they're designed to benefit things after they're built, but not before they're built.
Yeah. And no, if I can add and be brief, what I'm hearing is that there's really a certain level of capacity building that needs to occur within communities, within local jurisdictions, not just amongst the citizens who have been living within a place, who value a sense of community, but also amongst professionals, whether they be planners or whether they be architects, just simply to have a clearer sense in terms of what is it that can actually be done in order to facilitate a better outcome. When I lecture and engage a broad variety of different audiences, I try to teach people with very clear examples in order to move to something that's a bit more tangible in terms of what it is that we're actually referring to. And so through the process of really speaking in a planner's voice to planners, I try to make sure that we're trying to expand the range of examples that are part of the industry dialogue. Because there are a lot of great examples that practitioners reference, but what I often find is that those examples aren't as representative in terms of some of the great work that may be happening that's being led by, for example, those in the Latino community, or those who may be African American, or those who may be Asian Americans. And so the thing is that it's important to make sure that we're able to bind those very good examples together so that practitioners will have a clear sense in terms of what are some of the effective things that can be done, and basing it on a real practical, pragmatic approach. Mm-hmm. And so what I'm seeing is that there's a certain level of capacity building that has to occur, not just with citizens themselves, but also with the practitioners who actually help to make our community successful.
So every planning group or development group should probably employ sociologists and anthropologists as well as urban planners, right? Okay, so let's take a couple of questions from the audience here. Emmett? Please introduce yourself and your city.
My name is Emmett Jordan from the city of Greenbelt, Maryland. And you bring up some pretty interesting points about the intersection of balance between economic development, cultural development, and heritage preservation. And it's really a lot to try and balance out. Mm-hmm. So I'm just wondering about metrics or indicators or goals, or what sort of variables, to define those intersections are important or measurable.
Mm-hmm. Now, you're raising a very important question, and I'm glad that you did. One of the things in the process of doing my own research on this topic, it's important to acknowledge, I believe, the Travel Industry Association of America, which does regular research on cultural travel volume, has shown that there has been an increase in cultural travel volume even within our own country. So there is a value added. Ed McMahon, who is a senior fellow at the Urban Land Institute, tends to say that sameness is not a plus, it's a minus. And so what he's emphasizing by that is simply the fact that it's important for communities to try to figure out what it is that contributes to one's place-making dividend. Because of the fact that when people travel, they like to have an authentic experience as opposed to experiencing the same thing everywhere they go. And so there are groups that are tracking, for example, the metrics associated with cultural travel volume, or, for example, you can even consider some of the work that the Department of Commerce has done. They released a study, and I can't recall the name of it right now, in which they assessed and looked at really the importance of heritage preservation and cultural tourism within our own country. But the importance is to acknowledge the fact that there are institutions that have looked at these issues, and they understand that these issues frame more or less a perspective of sustainability that goes beyond just economics and the environment, but are looking really towards the issue of the humanities in terms of who we are as a people in terms of place and space. And those issues are also relevant as we work in terms of creating great communities.
So it seems like some of the issues, economic development and heritage preservation, are at odds on those two, competing or not really balanced, or it just seems like they're at odds with one another.
I wouldn't necessarily say they're at odds. I just think we need to take more time to think more critically about some of these issues that aren't necessarily central to the conversation. As I suggested earlier, it's been my own experience in which I've always felt that sometimes the conversation has been almost so focused on the physical form of a place that we lose sight of some of those other issues that also contribute towards creating great communities, encouraging places that are more livable. And so we have to figure out ways in order to expand the conversation and the dialogue to encompass a set of issues that aren't normally part of that conversation. But what we'll find in the process is that often there's value added in the sense that we understand that there is economic benefit. And once we're able to communicate and articulate what those benefits are, people understand how it does meet their bottom line.
Anybody else want to add to that? Okay. Before we go to the next question, I want to remind you, if you do get up and have to get to the next session, we do have an evaluation form for this program, so please remember to fill that out on your way out and leave it with staff. Next question, right here. Yes.
Yeah, Art Babbitt from City of Flagstaff Council member. We just actually finished a multi-year zoning rewrite process and went to a form-based code. At least in a portion of our more urbanized area, and I can't say enough that I think providing flexibility, options, and choices in that code is incredibly important. Even though a very small proportion of people will utilize granny flats, that's a process that over time actually does provide viable housing options. But I wanted to get to one of your kind of original points when you opened the session about whether the idea of kind of compact, new urbanist schools of thought is serving us well and serving the people who live there well. And I wanted to bring up, I guess, one point and then a question is the piece that I think, as someone who votes on the budget and is a fiscal steward of my municipality's budget, the piece that we didn't talk about is that the cost of service from a municipality side, different types of development is incredibly different. The cost of service, low density, sprawl-based development is a fiscal loser for a municipality. The cost of service, infill and a built environment that already has infrastructure to it is very different. And so one of the challenges is when you get into neighborhood plans or you get into an area where the neighborhood does not want diversification, the neighborhood does not want densification, yet they still want transit. And those, and there's a whole educational piece that needs to go with this. But from my perspective, the fiscal side of what I do, if you're not at 8 dwelling units an acre, I don't want to service you. From a transit, just from a kind of, does it pay for itself, in terms of making it viable. And that creates real interesting tensions between giving a neighborhood autonomy, which you want to empower neighborhoods, but you also need to make it clear that a neighborhood's choices have repercussions to them. So I would just like your comments on that tension between neighborhood autonomy and community-based organizations that don't always fit with the conventional planner and land use mode of, diversity is good. Medium density development provides realities that low density development does not provide, and how you overcome the neighborhoods, even who have been charretted and been vetted and engaged, saying no.
What we did in our neighborhood planning exercise the first time round was we said, if you're willing to take growth, we'll do neighborhood planning. There are neighborhoods we did not do neighborhood plans in. We said these are growth centers. And the neighborhood said, we don't want any growth. And we said, see you, bye. And they continue to get our basic services, but in terms of investment of amenities, we're focused within the growth areas. So that's one way that worked for us. The other way, the more subtle thing that's we're evolving to now is we've created these neighborhoods, these communities that feel like they have the ability to speak for themselves and really want what they want. It's become more clear to us now that we need to be coming into the dialogue by saying, we are, after all, still a city. And as a city, we have things that really are citywide that need to be looked at in a citywide or regional manner, not in a neighborhood manner. And we, the city, when we have these dialogues with you now, as we're updating these plans, we're going to bring that perspective and those values, and they're going to be important to us, and we're going to need to do them. What we want you all, the neighborhoods, to bring to us is your expertise and your locale, the social and the physical. And let's talk. You're not going to get everything that you want. We're not going to get everything we want, but we need to figure out how to meet somewhere in order to make a change.
And do you bring in the fiscal cost of services to those discussions with the neighborhood?
We have not, but that was a good idea.
I think for our city, we do master plan, and so we master plan, and the biggest issues are areas that we need to redevelop or that have yet to be developed. We're not going to have much more green. We only have maybe one more greenfield we're not going to see the typical suburban tract that we saw 30 or 40 years ago, the kind of community I live in. We're going to see medium density, new urbanist type, walkable communities, mixed use stuff, organized around the proximity to transit. That's the fact. And that's what the developers bring us anyway, because they can put more units on an acre, they can make more money on an acre, and they know that the cost of the city servicing those or whatever other public utilities need to provide those services is going to be lower for them as well. So that's part of that whole master planning process. So, but I think usually the developers, when they bring in a project, they tell you what it's going to cost. They tell you what the average price of those homes are going to be. So anyway,
they don't always come out that way. I'll tell you that later.
Yeah, that's true. So this is probably going to be the last question. Okay? Yes,
Hi,
please.
I'm Liz Sutton from the Dubuque, Iowa City Council members. Resistance. We have resistance because resistance and then some, especially with our downtown area because it has become non-existent. And we rebuilt it, revitalized it, and now it's a walkable community. But we had to have several meetings with the residents saying, in order for us to go forward, to bring businesses here, to have economic development, we have to go forward and we have to do this and we have to get you behind us. And now to go downtown, it's like, a friend of mine said who lived in Dubuque all his life, it's like going around the world. Because here's all these people from all these different areas that have come in because we have brought huge companies in that have supplied a great deal of jobs.
Wow.
And very decent jobs to make an affordable living. So now we're on the second phase of it, revitalizing further downtown to make that also a walkable, livable community and mixed use. But it does take everyone to get behind you. I mean, that's zoning, that's planning, that's council, that's everybody. And we all just have to work together. And it takes time and effort, but just have to say that residents, we need you to get behind us. Because that's the only way we're going to go forward. We're going to exist as a city. Because you're going to have, and we can grow, we can get business here, we can get people to stay here, but we have to do it together.
Okay, real quick.
Well, I just think sometimes from Southern California, I just think sometimes that those of you who are in the business and have done it before and have done it through the ages need to provide a vision, lots of different kinds of visions, and because you're dealing with a lot of different people, and those of us who have lived in a neighborhood a long time, or those of us who are a little incalcitrant, don't want to see things change and whatever, but they also have children and grandchildren that they want to stay in the community. They don't want to move, and they need practical ways of understanding that the children are not, you're not going to get them to stay if you don't provide the things that you, like you wanted to leave your family, somebody else is going to leave for down on off of the farm. And they need to be able to see a vision that they themselves cannot picture. And I think that those of you who can and have shown other communities what they're doing, it's a way to resist those people that say, we don't want anything, we don't want anything, we don't want anything. Well, there are people who maybe don't know that they would like to see some other kinds of, just like that restaurant that you were saying, you need to be able to not move the restaurant out, just broaden their vision of what they can actually become. And I think it's, but you don't know that unless you have an opportunity to actually tangibly see it in your, tangibly, that it's going to be fabulous when it's done. But they can't visualize it themselves. That's not what they do. They do other things.
It's a good comment.
I appreciate the question that you just raised. Actually, a couple of years ago, the Planning and the Black Community Division of the American Planning Association worked in Gary, Indiana. And Gary, as a community, isn't unlike the city of Detroit. It's a very distressed community. But the residents who we worked with within the city weren't against growth. They just wanted to make sure that we were able to encourage a process whereby people realized that the process was going to be just as important as the end result. And so we worked with residents within that community over a span of several days to help them to identify clear options for how they could guide the change process within their community rather than react to it. And so we've found that many of these approaches that are being applied, whether you call them charrettes, whether you call them technical assistance, work in all types of different communities. We have to be flexible enough in order to, in terms of the delivery of those approaches, to really leverage a lot of untapped talent, whether it's going to be organizations that have traction in minority communities or organizations that probably have a clearer sense in terms of how to engage a more deliberate public involvement process that really leverages meeting people at the grassroots. But our approach was meeting people where they are and then taking them to where they needed to go. And so those approaches do work, and I thank you for raising that question.